Bonsoir. Et merci d'être présent pour cette conférence. I will introduce the conference in English for courtesy for our guests. Tonight we are welcoming Suzanne Aasman, who is a digital humanities professor at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And so I'm really glad to welcome Suzanne as an invited professor at École des Chartes within the SkyTaste project. SkyTaste is a project I'm working on, funded by the PSL University, and it's a project to investigate emotions related to digital cultural heritage, and more specifically blogs, and even more specifically skyblogs. So I don't know if everybody here knows about Skyblog. If you don't, you should definitely check it out. We have a lot of interests in common, Suzanne and I, in particular this interest for what we call vernacular content. So vernacular in this specific school has quite a different meaning. Usually a more restricted one, like it's documents that are not written in Latin but in other types of languages. I found out that some of my colleagues may find it a bit disturbing that we are using actually vernacular as a term to speak about heritage objects from day-to-day activities. But there is a history behind that word, and history related to architecture, to photographs, to different kinds of media, and also to the history of the web. And there is a great website by Olia Lialina, and same, if you don't know Olia Lialina and her vernacular web website, you should definitely check it out. So this is an interest that we have in common, and I know you're also interested in what I've been working on how these objects from every day are becoming part of our cultural heritage, through which process and what happens and how they become actually, they have a new value as cultural heritage, and that includes web archives, that includes home pages. We're going to be speaking about that today, and all kinds of amateur media, and not only from the digital era, but also some amateur media that used to exist before. So to finish this introduction, you are also leading the Department of Journalism and Media in your university and the Center for Digital Humanities. So we are very lucky to have you here for almost 2 weeks at École des Chartes, and looking forward to your presentation today. So many thanks for being here, Suzanne, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel, and bonsoir. I'm sorry that I cannot speak French good enough to present here, so I do it in English. Thank you for having me here. I feel very honored, and also I was very much looking forward to this trip, as indeed we share a lot of shared interests. So there's more to come, another class and a workshop I'm looking forward to as well. So for this talk, I was thinking about exploring, well, if we can use vernacular, there are other words we can use, everyday, ordinary materials. So I was thinking about the idea of introducing how we as individuals, but also cultural heritage institutions, are struggling or feeling challenged by the idea of safeguarding the materials that we produce as humans. So that's why I came up with this title, From Home Movies to Home Pages, and exploring public and private challenges in archiving materials. I'd like to start with a more personal story, if you allow me. I should push this one. Recently, my mother passed away. She was 93 years old, and you can see her here as the baby. And as part of the funeral, I was the one who should write the speech, being the only daughter, but I also wanted to create a slideshow in honor her long life for 93 years. So in between her passing away and the funeral, there were like 7 days, I really dived into her personal archive in all her pictures, etc. And what I aimed to do was, I wanted to make this slideshow for, not just for me and my 4 brothers and grandchildren, but basically for everyone coming there, since my mother came from a huge family, but she was the only one still for a long time being alive of that generation. So what I tried to do was to make a slideshow in 3 chapters. The first 30 years about her life as a young woman, as a young girl. The second part about being married, starting a family, being with her husband and her 4 sons and daughter, which I am. And the third part about her life after my father passed away 30 years before. And so her life as a widow, and also her life as becoming a grandmother of many grandchildren. It really was an exercise in, on the one hand, emotion, so grieving and going through all of these materials that she was working, that she had kept. But there's also always the academic in my mind. So it was also an exercise in media archaeology. So what it meant was that I really had to think strategically about, if I want to do this in so many minutes, how am I going to do with the materials that are there? So thinking about, okay, if I'm working on her life in her teenage years, in her 20s, that means I'm talking about the 1940s or the 1950s. Of course, those are print stuff, but if I think about later periods in time, what was the media technology at hand? So where can I then find that stuff? So at my disposal, I had these, I think, 3 boxes of photo albums from different periods of her life, but also a laptop. She had a laptop, an iPad, and a smartphone. Despite her age of 93 years old, my mother was, well, maybe not very fluent in digital apparatuses, but she could use them because for her it was a way of communicating with her children, some of them living in other parts of the world. So she was an active user, which meant that I basically had a huge archive at my disposal. So that first stage was doable. I think my mother is from a poor family. There was not a camera in the house, so there were quite a number of pictures, maybe a total of 50 of her first 30 years. And the good thing was there was a cousin of mine who made himself like a family historian who digitized all the materials, including her pictures, and he had brought that to her, put it on her laptop, neatly organized and categorized like an archivist would do. So that was an easy job. Of course, they were damaged in a way, but I could show the life of her. The second part, which was about the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when basically she started her own family with and being with my father, that was much harder. Again, my parents did not have a camera. It only came later in the house. And the pictures that were there were not digitized. So I had to scramble through these boxes and find a few pictures, and the ones that I found, you can see them here on the, is your left or your right? I'm always, yeah. Sorry. You can see how they look like. The colors faded away, and I made manually with my phone, I made some pictures. That was a bit of a challenge, and I needed some help from others to get enough pictures. But the real challenge came later, the last 30 years. Those were the years of 2000 onwards. And initially, there were still printed photographs. So when my brothers had children, they would automatically print every picture twice, one for themselves and one for my mother. So there's loads of that kind of stuff. But along the way, she would be part of this digital environment we're all part of. So she would have a smartphone, she would be on WhatsApp, and she would automatically have her WhatsApp connected to her iPad so that every picture we send her would be down, and she would download it, would go into her iPad. She had a account for the iCloud, and just a few months before she passed away, one of the grandsons upgraded her cloud storage so that she could have even more pictures, because these pictures were her lifesaver. She could go through them again and again, and everyone visiting her had to see these thousands of pictures. And how to choose them. So how to find your way through this massive volume of pictures. And also while it happened, my brothers were sending me other pictures. So I had the feeling that my phone was like a network center. All these different people's bringing in these pictures. At one point I said, stop, please, don't do it. And I had to make some choices. So what it shows really is that, I should put this one, sorry, is that, so and here's her iPad, giving an impression of the pictures that are there. I think what it really shows in a very simple way, the difference between analog, memory, being slow in a way, very local, so I had to go through the boxes, and usually they were about a particular place in time. It was labor intensive to find them, and also there was a limitation, which in the end maybe was not such a bad thing. Whereas digital memory is, it's instant and it's global. The pictures came from everywhere, also because my family lives in different places of the world, but it all got together in this on this iPad. It had this idea of automation. Everything streamed in automatically in her iPad, and it was so in that sense it was scalable compared to the limitation. So I think that's an interesting thing that probably we all have experienced. I'm telling nothing new. The idea of the automation of self-archiving, which is so much part of it, and the concentration of the custodial power that is not only for her trying to use her iPad, but also very much the platforms that she makes use of, which archives by default. So if you have WhatsApp, you have the right, by default it downloads and keeps the messages. And also, but it is determined, right, by the terms of service. So at one point, the cloud storage was full and she needed an extra account and pay extra money to upgrade it. So this scale and granularity also of the trace production was interesting to find out. Of course I knew, but now I really found out again that metadata is many times automatically captured. Although it's invisible, I could click on it and then find out the location and the time stamp. Whereas with these pictures that were digitized, like this one for instance, the cousin who had done the work was able to trace all the persons on it, but he did not do anything about the year or the place, so it was very limited in that sense. And also what's interesting in this example of the digital memory, this collapse almost of the temporal and the contextual distance, that it all comes together in one stream, and it seems that there is no difference if a picture was sent from the US or from my hometown Groningen, or also you can see that maybe or maybe not, but there are some black and white pictures there in there as well, because they were later admitted because my mother started digitizing or making pictures themselves. So an interesting, it was an interesting and also rewarding exercise. And it also shows how you could think about this, and I always like this quote by Henry Jenkins, who once said, "Our lives, relationships, fantasies, desires also flow across media channels. Being a lover or a mommy or a teacher occurs on multiple platforms." And that makes it, I think, from a media historical, media archaeological perspective, really interesting. These are all practices. You can think about written cards or home movies or Skype snapshots. That's the one thing that got lost, by the way, or other forms of cultural expression, everyday vernacular expression, how they have particular meanings in particular contexts. And then 2 weeks later, a week before I came here to Paris, something horrible happened. My smartphone went down, it got broke. It had served me for almost a decade, so I was aware that it wasn't functioning that good anymore. But now it stopped working altogether, and immediately I was in a panic. I thought, oh, this should not happen. I was not so afraid of the pictures. I knew they were all in safe spaces. But I was a bit afraid about all my WhatsApp messages, which I did with my mother. All the pictures and the audio messages, and I was terrified I would lose my last written comments with her. And indeed, when I changed the SIM card, because I had my work phone as well, I put the SIM card on my old phone in the new one, I could not find those chats. And it really made me sad, and it also made me a bit angry at myself, annoyed that I was not more careful. I teach about this stuff. I felt like this doctor, who warns don't smoke, and then after the patient is gone, takes his cigarette. But I knew this phone was at its end, but I failed to take appropriate measures. I had deleted stuff to make it working, so I had done a lot of stuff, but not extra care in archiving the chat conversations. So now I was stuck with data loss, which most of all was also an emotional loss. Luckily, I found some online tools that helped me to retrace some of the data, but not everything. And I now wait for my family members to export the chats and give me some of our shared chats that we have, so that I can store them. So I'm not proud of telling this part of the story, but I think it does point to the central topic of this presentation. Are we as individuals able to safeguard our digital, emotional-laden objects in our personal digital archives? So since the last 2 decades of this, the last 2 decades of the previous century, new cycles of digital media technologies emerged that stimulated human interaction and communication on a large scale, creating growing volume of digital records. And on a daily basis, we all do here, we create multiple content. We post, we share, we upload, we send, and we store thousands and thousands of pictures, text messages, videos, and recorded audio conversations. We basically live in media, meaning that digital generated forms of communication practices are ubiquitous, while it automatically enters our personal archives. That determines how we will be able to share memories until our phone stops working, or our cloud storage service becomes inaccessible, or the platform disappears, or the software supporting the reading of a format becomes obsolete, or there's just too much and we lose track. Basically, what happens is that in this day and age, we need to become personal research data managers. So I use this picture because we all, I guess the same here, have to come up in our research with research data management plans, and I felt like maybe that is something that is we need skills and expertise in as well. We need to become, I think, active agents of our personal digital archive and acquire some level of skills that seems to be so much more advanced than more traditional curatorial practices. Think about scrapbooking, where you can cut out maybe some text and combine it and gluing it with pictures, or more difficult than domestic photography of home movie making. So I wonder, maybe that's for the discussion later, where you stand about this fear of the sheer volume, the abundance, or maybe you're more anxious about its ephemerality. So our contemporary digital culture is very much marked by this striking contradiction. On the one hand, we are told, for instance, the internet forgets nothing. Our photos, posts, messages, and search history persist indefinitely. They sometimes resurface years later in unexpected context. But on the other hand, archivists have warned of the coming digital dark age in which personal and cultural records may disappear due to technical obsolescence or platform shutdowns or hardware failure. I believe when viewed through the lens of personal digital archiving, these two anxieties are maybe not oppositions, but expressions of the same structural condition. Individuals, and most likely cultural heritage institutions as well, do not always control these infrastructures that store our memories. So maybe that's a nice discussion later, if we are more afraid of a digital dark age or about the digital environment that never forgets. And it may be also, and I do not have a clear answer, but is the digital archive a radical historical break or just an intensification of long-standing archival dynamics on the new infrastructural conditions? And there are some archivists here, so that might help us to think about this. So in order to understand these archival challenges related to what Jean Burgess described as everyday data cultures, maybe that's an alternative for vernacular when that doesn't work, we need to understand the everyday complexities of individuals dealing with the messiness of personal archiving and how this has been facilitated or disrupted by changing media technologies, from home movies to home pages. So I think what might help us to think about this is a more media historical and media archaeological approach, which is part of the second part of my talk now. So I have been doing quite a lot of research about home movies. I started my research career doing my thesis about home movies. Home movies in the first part of the 20th century in the Netherlands, where I focused very much on why people bought a camera and started recording their everyday life, and also how to analyze those type of images. And over the years, I have been extending this to bigger projects, and one of those projects that is already a few years ago was called Changing Platforms of Ritualized Memory Practices. It took me 5 years to say this like this. It's a very complicated sentence. Where together with 2 PhDs and some other researchers, we try to look at a long durée history of home movie making. What we wanted to do, just shut this down for a sec. What we tried to do was to look at the relationship between changing technologies of media production. Think about film, and then later video, and then more recent digital cameras, how they shape new practices of production, but also rituals in memory staging, but also looking at screening. So it's not just about making images, but also how these images are seen, perceived by the intended or not intended audience. We took that as a long durée perspective, like 100 years, and we wanted to look not only at the diachronic, but also the synchronic development. So what does it mean when video came along almost at the same time that television really became big? We looked at discontinuities and continuities, and basically the idea was to look at amateur media dispositive. So this relationship where we looked at how each media technology is defined not only by the type of images it produces, but also how it is perceived. And this is a slide that shows how Tim van der Heijden, he was one of the PhDs, tried to show how in different periods different media technologies worked or how they overlapped. And he called his book Hybrid Histories, because it's not just as clear-cut as it might look here, but every new media technology takes along features, devices, rituals, or conventions from previous ones, and those become part of that medium as well. So here it's about film, video, and the digital. So we were also then very interested in what does it mean when someone buys a camera, takes the camera into the domestic sphere and record their particular lives, and how it was advertised. So how was the user imagined at the time? So how we also looked at commercials and advertisements, and looked at how who was addressed. Like for instance in this advertisement, Filmo, a gift that turns back the pages of happiness. So from the start you could see that Kodak and other companies, like in this case Bell and Howell, really addressed the family as their main target group. I thought maybe it's nice just to see one of those films that we were looking at. It's one of my favorite parts. It's called Yeti Leert Lopen, Yeti Learns to Walk. It was made on 60mm black and white silent movie from 1941. The father was, or the father had the camera, so he would usually be the one who was filming. And in this case, he was taking the camera. It was 1941, so it was in the midst of the Second World War, where of course the child just has her own developments. Let's see. Oh, there it is. And the quality is quite high because it is a special collection that was also restored, and it's at the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision. We're not going to look at the whole film. It's a compilation of usually a film reel was like 3 minutes. So the father usually had the method of doing compilations afterwards. He would cut the film and then bring them together. This is a typical opening scene. He had 5 children, I think, and with each film he would present the new baby. But let's go to Yeti. Learning how to walk. Not sure it doesn't. There we are. I wrote a whole chapter about this particular scene because I was so fascinated by the fact that it takes a while. So the father's very patient in handling the camera. He was definitely on his knees. He was not standing. And there's also this moment where Yeti, the little girl, is walking towards the camera and the whole image becomes blurred. So I was connecting this very much to a close reading about fatherhood, motherhood in the 20th century, the changing the changing look at the importance of children, for instance. So for me, this was very much also something that told us something about a new duty that many parents feel, like you have to document the life of your children, whether it's a home movie or photograph, that might differ. But it has become this new part of your life. And I always ask students, is there anyone who does not have one picture or one video of him or herself, but almost no one would answer that question with a, no, I don't have one. It's so much part of our life that we tend to forget about this. Here we see her, it's like, anyway. It's also interesting, I was visiting her and then she was a grand old lady and I knew her so well from being a baby. Let me see, where is the PowerPoint? And it's really interesting that if you start then comparing with new media technologies, video, then it's also with the arrival of synchronous sound, and then later with digital cameras or smartphones, it becomes so much easier to catch that moment. You don't have to put the reel in the camera. So there's a lot of things that are interesting once you start comparing, and this is one that was put online. Where do I have it? I think I already have this one without the advertisements. Yeah.
Come here. Yeah.
Well, she did as big.
Oh, can get that other one going? Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
As you can see, this is already older material. It was shot like, I think, 15 years ago. Some random family, I don't know them. They're somewhere in the US.
Oh, the Spirit is upon me.
But once we did our project and I was starting to look on YouTube and I typed in first steps, I was like, oh my God,
What's up?
millions of first steps. And sometimes they were about elephants, young elephants, and sometimes they were young ducks, but most of the times they were about babies taking their first steps.
Oh, yeah! Yeah!
And you laugh, right? Because these are Richard Chalfin, who's an anthropologist, and he looked at domestic photography. He said, basically, if you look at all these type of everyday images, nothing changes. People always have the same topoi, always have the same topics, and not much changes over time. And if you look at this, you could say, oh, maybe he's right there. And then, even if you go further into this, like thinking about how people used Skype is already cultural heritage, I would say, but how this became the way of making a video call, and people then also started thinking about how to record video calls and upload them on YouTube as well. You could say, as Roger Audin, the late Roger Audin, who works here in Paris, said it's an upsurge almost of dispositive. So it has exploded in multiple ways in how people now use, appropriate, and sometimes also change media technologies in ways that were not maybe intended as such. Skype was not meant to be a recording medium, but as a live communication type of medium. And if we then also look at how these images, how people watch these images, that is also very interesting, right? So this is a picture. There are not many pictures of how people watched home movies. We have advertisements, but not real pictures. So in this case, it's a projector in the back, and the whole family is watching these movies on a special night, most likely. So the dispositive very much is here about collective watching these movies, which is already different when video came along. This is an advertisement that shows the father. Again, it's a very gendered technology in that way. How the father handles this new video camera, looks through the camera at his wife and his daughter, which are then at the same time also shown or broadcasted on what is a kind of television set. So the relationship very much changes. You don't have to send the reel to a development center, wait maybe for 2 weeks before it is finished, then come back, and then you can maybe on a Sunday afternoon close the windows and then take the projector, put effort in looking at the material. What is shown here is the ease of making, but also the change in the temporal way and how it is projected. And what that also means maybe in what is filmed at the same time, including instead of 3 minutes, 3 hours, instead of black and white in color, instead of silent, there's synchronous sound. So there's a lot of changes that comes along, including also how Archives looks at this material. So when I started working on home movies, I used to work with film archives who were usually quite enthusiastic about this material. But once I started asking for, will you please also collect videos? They said, oh, no, we don't like video. It's, it doesn't have the same look and feel. Also for a person who has to catalog the material, you have to look at 3 hours to first steps. So it is a different medium that also has different archival value, although more recently that has changed, luckily, although many of these videos have already been fading away. And here, as an example of how we watch digital materials, there is no longer the need of projection. We can do it individually on our smartphone, which also might change the way that we produce film. If you don't have to send it to a center where there is strange eyes also looking at your material, what does that mean maybe also for the intimacy? Or if you make a picture and upload it on YouTube, what does that mean? So I think what is interesting here is always to be very medium specific, what, as Lisa Gittelman is saying, what the protocols are of how a medium works and what that means for, in this case, what is recorded, or in relation to how we think what the intended audience is. Or watch these types of images online on our computer, and also thinking then maybe about not this individual small audience, literally small audience, but thinking about now you can contact the whole world, which happened, for instance, which happens today every day with YouTube, but also with TikTok and all these different platforms, but also happened, started to becoming a huge thing during the years of COVID, when people were so bored that they used the film camera to connect to others, or started recording the lives that they had. I just took some random ones. Day in the life of a German student. I thought it was interesting because if you look at amateur films, many of these films have the title "A Day in a Life," which is really a kind of recurring thing. Or when people also started sharing about what it means to be in quarantine in life. It's hard to retrace now those TikToks, by the way. No one feels responsible for archiving these. It has been really hard also to deal with the algorithm, of course, to be able to find them again. Because I do think that although they look all very personal, these first steps, I agree with what Marita Sturken has mentioned. Personal memory, cultural memory, and history, they are not separate things. They do not exist within neatly defined boundaries. Rather, memories and memory objects can move from one realm to another, shifting meaning and context. Thus, personal memories can sometimes be subsumed into history, and elements of cultural memory can exist in concert with historical narratives. Because of these kinds of boundary crossings in what is remembered, true distinctions between personal memory, cultural memory, and history cannot be made. And I think that is also something that is acknowledged by more and more archives, where they do think it's important to also document everyday life, and therefore many times need those materials that we hold in our own archives. Except, of course, when it comes to then the issue of how to keep those materials safe, not just as maybe as institutions, but also for us as individuals, how to deal with it. So in itself, so when I was talking about my phone, I could give the impression that I think that, you know, our digital memories are now more vulnerable than ever. At the same time, if you, of course, look at previous documents, fragility is nothing new. Archival problems predate the digital era. I guess I'm not saying anything new here. So paper deteriorates, photographs fade, as you saw also in the pictures that I showed. Magnetic tapes, they demagnetize. Letters are lost in movies of fire. Nitrate film is a nightmare. Or people could just also delete stuff. They could throw away letters. They could tore these pictures because of some traumatic event or whatever. So it always has been a challenge to keep those safe. But the interesting question, and I want to use the next part of it, is to think more about what about personal digital archive? So what is then new maybe or different if we see that compared to analog area? Are they, as I call them here, passive exhaust systems? So it happens, they somewhere end up on our laptop, on our iPad, and sometimes we have to do stuff, but basically it's there unless we want to find it again, and then it turns out it's no longer there, the video is unavailable, the website has been taken down, or whatever the case is. So how especially are we then as individuals part of this digital ecosystem? How are we in control? Do we have agency? Or if you might also think that maybe it's the corporations, it's the big tech that function as de facto archivists. It's, you know, it's Facebook or it's Instagram or it's TikTok, and they determine what we can see. They design and shape what becomes historically visible. Because many times, when I try to search for material, it's very hard to find exactly that material. I have to beat the algorithm, the filter. So algorithmic ranking determines many times what is remembered socially. So I do exercises with students and to make them and to challenge them to go beyond the first 10 websites that are there. Or now they have to, now we're challenged by AI coming up with its own answer. So how do we deal with it? That is one thing, but at the same time, you could also see that there are, within a certain scholarship, there is this plea for attention for that maybe this moment also creates some more opportunities. So a book by Abigail de Kosnik, which is called Rogue Archives, it's a really interesting title. She's very much interested in how individuals who use the archive for their vernacular practices and see them also as part of a popular culture, where everything that is produced and that's somehow uploaded on the web also becomes material for remixing, for reusing, where archives have become this playful material which can become part of how individuals have way more tools to come up with their own materials. And that then becomes part of the archive as well. She's talking here about archives of her own, and she calls it archontic production. It's a what she sees as a part of contemporary media that makes use of the archive, but then puts it back into the archive, or what she calls then an archive as an ever-expanding collection, as a more creative way of it. So that's that then is then the idea that these types of materials are still there, and at the same time, much of this disappears, and of course there are ways of getting them back, or is becoming more and more awareness of that much of these personal materials that have somehow been uploaded on platforms or have been part of the internet does have their own value. Skyblock, you're already mentioning that, is part of that with the BNF. Here in the Netherlands, we have a similar type of collection a bit earlier from the early web, which is Access for All, which has been collected by the National Library in the Netherlands and also now acknowledged as UNESCO World Heritage, or part of the World of Memory Heritage collection, I should say, which is helpful in a way because now we can not only do research, but also this research helps us to raise also awareness for these kind of materials. And of course, there's the Internet Archive since the mid-90s, also giving access to so many websites via their Wayback Machine, which is, I think, one of the most popular tools for exploring the web, the early web. And this, together with so many other initiatives in different countries, give at least some opportunities for finding back that stuff. Although maybe not everyone is happy with that idea, and that is, I think, something else that is interesting and comes back to this paradox. Like some people are afraid that everything appears, and others are afraid that everything disappears and reappears. Sorry, and so this I found on TikTok. Someone saying, "Oh, me randomly discovering that over 100 of my deleted videos from the past 3 years are uploaded to Internet Archive." Already thinking about hundreds of videos, by the way. And but the discussion, the comments are really interesting. I think someone is commenting, "For my own peace of mind, I will not look this up." So there were pages of people responding to this video. Someone was a bit worried about privacy issues. Can you do this with private accounts as well? And is the site safe? There's a bunch of archives of me arguing in Twitter when I was 12. It's not identifiable, but still discomforting. So someone who was young at age and then seeing suddenly his or her comments. Someone is saying, "I need to find my old TikToks again." So for that, it's a great tool. Another one say, "I'm so happy that my old internet activity is fully deleted and gone." So these responses give different points of views, which I think is also good to know, right? Because as a historian, I always think I like to have this stuff safe and I want to make use of it, but at the same time, maybe those people are not so happy with me looking at these types of material. And we will have a workshop about the ethical part anyway. So that brought me to the last part of it, where I thought maybe it's also good, and I'm not sure how you feel about it, so please let's discuss this afterwards. To think about, we talk a lot, at least in the Netherlands, about digital skills, about digital literacy, about ways of being able as a citizen, as an individual, as a person to deal with the digital, whether that's doing taxes online. But also I thought maybe we could also think about this in terms of the responsibilities we might feel or have when it comes to our own personal archive. What does that mean in this day and age where we have these huge platforms, where there are indeed also archives, but where we also have our own machines, our own devices. How to think then about this in terms of being this personal data manager, this having this stewardship over your own materials. So I try to come up with a few of them, and please let me know if they make sense or not. So I think it starts with this more conceptual skill, this archival awareness, to think about that every platform might be functioning as an archive. without you knowing it. That there is, where there is this kind of material that is out there, and maybe that you understand that there are data being generated by you that is somewhere kept, and that you think about who is storing it, and does that mean that storing is also preservation, archiving, in the sense that we might understand it as archiving, something that is kept sustainable for future purposes, or is it storage in the sense of you pay for it until the service has ended, or we store it because we want to use this data for commercial purposes. So what exactly does it mean? What kind of conceptual understanding do we need to have about these kind of platforms where most of our personal data ends up with? And I'm not only talking about cookies and those kind of stuff, but also pictures and more deliberate, intentional data that we leave behind on platforms. This is an example that I think I should have had it after another one. Where we try to be helpful here for amateurs. So part of that project, Changing Platforms, we built a best practice guide, I think a few years ago, where we wanted to raise this awareness, so tell people why maybe they should keep their home movies and not throw it away, or if they want to digitize it into video, then still don't throw it away, because these videos can also be corrupt, or DVDs, or etc. So some basic ideas about what does it mean to archive stuff, including more technical materials. But as you can see, we made this for the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision, but even this guide about how to keep it safe is no longer accessible. That also made me, we should be a bit modest about what we can do. It's nothing is for eternity. But also what we wanted to do in that guide is to think about some basic skills in terms of technical control. So what does it mean? How many local backups do you need to make? How many storage locations do you need? Do I need to check the file integrity periodically, which I think is already a huge task, and not something I can ask my mother of 93 years old to do so. So these are basically and not even myself, because as I showed my phone, so these are kind of acquired skills, you could say, but there might be ways of being more helpful in understanding file formats, basic version control, etc. In a way that you know what it means when you upload something somewhere or store it, and how to be able to retrieve it in the right formats. And also know that these digital files themselves are not self-preserving. Because you have to know, can I still open them? Maybe they are fragile. Does it need metadata? I'm not sure about you, but so many times all of these pictures, you have no idea where they come from, unless you know how to find maybe the automated metadata that are part of it. But also thinking about how to organize and label them. And of course, many of these platforms do, right? Because when I did this slideshow, I was, of course, using a lot the tool that helped me to do face recognition as a great tool of organizing and the materials without the use of labeling. But this is essentially an amateur archival practice that has been done also by people working for amateurs with their home movies. But I think with digital memory, it requires a bit more technical maintenance, not just passive storage. I could put away this paper and probably find it in 50 years in maybe the same condition, but we're not sure about the DVDs that we used or the videos that we use. So these digital, especially media technologies, do have a challenge. Maybe we also need a competence in thinking about deleting and forgetting, so that we delete materials meaningfully, manage private settings, and think about the legal frameworks that we have in Europe, and also see every now and then how that works and if it's still meaningful in a way. This is, by the way, also what we have been doing, right? I'm not sure, but there might be people here who wrote very intimate diaries when they were 13 years old and then later were ashamed and they threw it away, and then 20 years later you think, why did I do that? Why was I? So this is an ongoing thing, right? So curating your own life is quite difficult. So maybe this is too much to ask from people, and maybe we should think about benign neglect as a way to deal with this. But overall, I think this one, I thought about thinking about the context in which you offer your images. So who has access to the images? I was so lucky that my mother never used passwords. We tried to avoid that for her, and now it was easy for me to work with them. But of course, passwords do have a purpose, right? So they should also protect you in a way. So start thinking about who has access to the materials, or if I upload my material, and there I think it's also interesting to think about it more historically. When people uploaded something in the 90s, they had different perceptions about the internet than if you upload materials right now after, Cambridge Analytica. So there are different awarenesses as well. And people were not always, and before the age of the search engine, it was not always, people thought, I will never be found on the internet, who am I? But with search engines, these things can change. So a kind of awareness of what the boundaries of the platform are, and risk assessment before posting. Of course, these are digital skills that has been taught to children as well. Is it in France that there is now a discussion about the age where you can post or have access to social media? Yeah, right. Yeah. And understanding this algorithmic resurfacing. So being aware that materials can come back in time. So basically it's about narrative curation, that you think about maybe also not just technical, but more like, what digital traces do I want to leave behind? How to make this meaningful for whom? And also think about making their selections and create intentional collections, like people did with their photo albums, where they printed it, put it in a book, and added some handwritten comments maybe. This might be helpful to have more than just a database, but meaningful autobiographies. And last but not least, this also means like infrastructure awareness, where you think about that these platforms that offer you all kinds of ways of having your materials somewhere stored, that you are basically part of a business model with terms of services, business models, risk of suspension, of shutdown. For a while, I have been tracing stories about people who lost their materials, and one of the earliest examples that really showed this to me was the Kodak Gallery that started in, I think, the early 2000s, where you could upload your pictures. And Kodak, of course, having this history of 100 years, being the main factory of photography of family pictures, and this slogan they had at the time, keep me, protect me, share me, and I will live forever, then became bankrupt and had to sell all of their materials. And when I followed up this story and looked for people who lost their materials, you could see that many people lost their wedding pictures, etc. Because what happened was that they sold it to Shutterstock, but then those pictures remained accessible for US users, but for users outside the US, they lost all their pictures. And there was no way that they could deal with it. So as one of the comments was saying, Kodak deleted photos of my life I had for the last 15 years. They win the biggest online asshole award, as it was saying here. So even though they had this reputation, it was not safe in the end. So a bit of long-term planning skills there is then important. Planning for account legacy access. So I have a PhD who's looking at these kind of digital legacy issues people have. It's also a new business model. People helping you organize folders coherently and create documentation, maybe for people who live, who is the next generation. Naming conventions that survive time so that you use the right words, which in itself is also difficult. So I did some seminars with students, what I call the living archive, and then one of the assignments I would always have is that I ask them, please interview your parents about their archival practices. And there was one student who had a very interesting case. His mother would be responsible for the analog parts, so she would do the pictures and the photo albums, and she would make pictures with an analog camera. And the father, who was an ICT guy in the 90s, he was responsible for the digital. He built a website, he had his own server, he was very proud of it. And then I asked him, the student, I said, did you also ask your parents if it has a password and who owns the password? And he went back to his father, and it turned out no one had the password. So it can be those small little things that make such a difference, whereas the albums of the mother were still there. And what was also interesting, by the way, in this case, I remember, so at one Christmas, the mother finally bought a smartphone. Because she had a smartphone, she did not make pictures because the digital belonged to the husband. But the husband never took pictures with Christmas because that would always be the case of the wife. So suddenly there was this memory gap because they didn't align these kind of practices, which was a really interesting case on how this works. So some emotional and ethical competence, and that I think was the last one, is then also in place, deciding what not to preserve or to preserve, respecting others' privacy in shared materials, negotiating shared memory, which really was also part of the slides. The slides show that I made really on group chats, find out what is important to have added there or not. So agency there is also relational and not very individual. So with that being said, can I have a few more minutes? Yeah, because I wrote my conclusion to make sure. So for us as individuals and for cultural heritage institutions, maybe the same, attempting to preserve meaningful aspects of our digital lives, major challenges have emerged. Personal emails stored on outdated services, photographs saved on aging hard drives, or creative projects built in obsolete formats are vulnerable to unexpected disappearance. So early on, media archaeologists as Kittler and Wolfgang Ernst reminded us that digital memory depends on material substrates, servers, magnetic storage, file systems that also inevitably decay. Wolfgang Ernst further emphasizes that digital archives require constant technological refreshment. Without migration to new formats and devices, data becomes unreadable. For individuals, maintenance is labor intensive and often requires extensive data management skills, as I just showed. And in addition to this, personal digital archiving always oscillates between overexposure and fragility. Social media platforms preserve vast quantities of trivial or potentially embarrassing data because it aligns with our economic interest. Meanwhile, personally, significant materials, draft manuscripts or family correspondence may be lost when a laptop fails, a smartphone collapses or a cloud service shuts down. So the digital dark age does not necessarily threat corporate databases, it threatens decentralized, privately stored materials that lack institutional grounding. So as Jacques Derrida argued, archives are tied to authority. They depend on institutions that have the power to preserve. Individuals... Sorry. I thought I had... It's a nice sound, by the way. It's a new phone. Where was I? Jacques Derrida argued, archives are tied to authority. They depend on institutions that have the power to preserve. Individuals rarely possess such power. Instead, they rely on corporate platforms that function as de facto personal archivists. These platforms determine retention policies, data portability, and deletion procedures. What appears to be a personal archive is often a licensed data set governed by terms of service. And the result is a profound asymmetry. Individuals struggle to delete what they would prefer forgotten, yet struggle equally to preserve what they value. A forgotten password can erase years of communication. A discontinued service can eliminate entire family histories. At the same time, algorithmic resurfacing features ensure that certain memories reappear without consent. So personal digital archiving does become less a matter of memory and of infrastructural dependence. So seen from this perspective, the paradox of digital permanence and digital decay reflects the politics of personal memory in platform society. The problem is not simply that the internet remembers too much or forgets too easily. It is that individuals lack agency, sovereignty, skills and expertise over their digital traces. Memory persists where it serves institutional interest. It vanishes where it does not. So although I was annoyed at myself that personal digital archiving Although I was annoyed at myself because I failed in safeguarding my conversation histories, I also need to remember that personal digital archiving is neither naturally secure nor naturally ephemeral. It is contingent, uneven, and shaped by infrastructures that challenges individual control. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there questions in the room?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Emmanuel, for inviting Professor Aasman. Thank you for your talk. It was fantastic. I have a question about ethics of doing research on so recent materials. How do you handle the fact that the person that you saw the first steps of is now a senior citizen, that you have to, I don't know, get explicit permissions to share those materials? How? I'm a medieval historian. For me, it's very far. I luckily don't have to ask my object of study any permission. So could you tell us more about those challenges associated with so recent media? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I must say that these home movies already feel medieval. Because so for the home movies, when I did my research there, I had as a rule for myself in sampling or in selecting my sources, I had the rule that I needed to know the family because I needed contextual information. Because otherwise you can look at these images and then make conclusions that are not very fitted. So that means that with every family I was in contact and I had permission to use their collections and also use the materials to show here. And so that was not problematic because I dealt with scarcity. I was dealing with 16mm or 8mm or even 35mm film, and I visited these families, built moments of trust. But of course, when I finished my research, I thought, okay, I'm going to do something else with my life. I'm not going forever to do amateur media. But then YouTube started, and I was so intrigued because it seemed like this parallel universe where you could follow everyone's life from being born to die, and everything in between. And then you no longer have that moment where you can say, I want to know these families, because I was also interested in the global aspect of it. The fact that, these are families who upload it, who publish it. And I must admit that at the time, these privacy issues were not so, I'll say that, they were not so urgent to me. It seems I had, and there will be a workshop on this on Tuesday, where I try to develop my ideas here a bit further about, I thought, these people publish it, so why do I care about privacy? So I think that is partly based on still seeing the internet as it happened in the 90s, as this democratic open space where people finally find their voice, and who am I to discourage them in having that. Of course, since then we had these different scandals, Cambridge Analytics one of them, but of course we learned more about platformization, we learned more about how this big tech is also doing harm here, or young people who don't want to be remembered. So now it is much more complicated. So here I have shown a few images, but usually, of course, we are now bound by these rules, like anonymization, is that the right word? Pseudonymization, or finding different methods to deal with that. Yeah, and sometimes it's so good to have to study that period that you're doing.
Thanks, Susan, for the presentation. I was wondering, because you touched upon the technological, generation. You touched upon the, the sort of topology, like with the platformization and stuff. I was wondering, is there any, views we can have about how mature or aware people are in terms of their practice of, keeping their memories and organizing that? Is there any change? Do we have any study that indicates that people are kind of trying to take control back, or their practices are changing? Some sort of studies or surveys, or I was curious about that.
Yeah, there are many studies, I think, about these practices of how people are dealing with these challenges of their of keeping their memories safe. The idea of their digital legacy, so what happens after they die, for instance, and what happens then to your profile. Of course, there's a lot written about these issues with being on Facebook, but literacy in the sense of, like I did, I went into my mother's laptop. I think she would have been fine with that because she already, but you can imagine that not everyone has that same relationship in the family. So I think these things, there are studies. So I have a PhD student who's looking at these everyday practices of different types of, different groups of people. So in one of her study group are people who really have no money, no job, so they are many times refugees in a refugee center, and there she's looking with them. So what do you want to leave behind? That's the question that she asks people. So what do you like to leave behind? And then with the focus on digital materials. So those people have no interest whatsoever in leaving stuff behind, but she's also doing interviews with these new types of companies that help you to deal with your digital legacy, which helps you with thinking about passwords, who can have access, what do I want to keep private, do I want to keep things forever, and so, but this is still an unexplored area. I think we can do much more in understanding how this works, but it's so these questions have different layers. They have technical layers, like I showed a bit in these kind of competencies, but there's also emotional awareness, and there's the ethical aspect of it. So it's not so, in that sense, not so easy, but I might look for a survey that probably they are there. Yeah. It's a good question.
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. I had a question about the space of archive. I'll explain what I think about that. It's, well, you know, like a century ago when you had archives, it was photos, films, it was something material which you kept at your house or at the ceiling. But now we're at a time where archive are conserved in like the cloud servers, which are far, far away from our local machine. So I had a question about the future of archive. Are people going to be more aware about how to keep their archive more local and next to their place? Or are they going to, how can I say it? Yeah, it's about the definition of what an archive is. Will it be some place where you condense your data, or will it be like parsed in the cloud and in all these servers far, far away?
It's a big question. There are also archivists here, but I think what I see, for instance, is that archives, of course, you know, they have to also change their policies along the way, and have become much more participatory in the sense that they seek collaboration with citizens. And I think local archives especially can have a function here. So, for instance, in Groningen, where I lived, the local archive there was one of the first archives in the Netherlands that started to collect home movies. Now, why did they do so? Because they saw that there was not much audiovisual material about Groningen. This is a region up north, and the national television didn't came there quite often. They would also always go to Amsterdam. So one way of having visual material about their own province and city was to invite amateurs who made recordings and bring that to the archive. And with that, they established a close relationship with the local groups. And I think what we see now is that they try to do the same for the web. They also try to seek collaboration in their digital archives, and also think about how can we have that same kind of relationship, and that people bring their materials. I think there's more to do so as well. One of the models I'm sometimes thinking about is, so with home movies there, every year you have at the World Heritage Day, you have a home movie day. So, for instance, in local archives or in the Netherlands, I think it's also in France, Film Museum, people can bring their stuff, and at the table they look at the material, and if they think it should be repaired, they give advice, or if it's unique, they say, oh, please, can we have it? And I think it would be very helpful if we have something the same for the digital materials as well, like instead of a home movie day, a web archive day, for instance, or a social media archive day. Also to make sure that the awareness grows, and also the idea that archives can really benefit from it. And for archives, of course, they also need people who use the archive, or they also have to legitimize why they would keep our cultural memory. Does that answer your question a bit? Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Hello. There was this picture of this family, showing some, I suppose, a movie. It strikes me, and my question is this kind of family or collective memory, is it gone? Because, there is this trend of device now. They are more individual. So maybe we get more data, more movie, more pictures, but it's more difficult to share it. In fact, because the device is it's for it's for the individual, and in a sense, maybe there is another trend is that, as you mentioned, your mother, people has to manage the difficulty, this urge data. By their own, not in a family context, and more like an individual too. So that's my question. Is it a trend? Is it something that you have studied?
Yeah, I think so. I saw a very funny TikTok movie the other day where two people who are a couple are sitting next to each other. They both look at their phones and they send each other pictures. Where have you been? Oh, yeah. I sent you the picture. Oh, beautiful. Oh, I've been here. And then the other one is looking. So instead of, it's of course, it's maybe making it a bit of a schematic version, but that's, of course, part of the way that we share pictures. It's via our individual devices, which does not mean that the other way of sharing images by looking like we do here in a collective setting, also images, we have beamers. But I think these things have always been changing, right? So if you think about the carousel with the slideshow as part of the same viewing context as a home movie with a projector, for each new medium you take something from the previous one, but there will also be new practices and new ways of doing. But definitely that individual way of looking that was not there before. Unless you think about the kinetoscope in the 19th century, which you threw in a dime and then... So I think media history in that sense has always shows these different pathways, and some of them were only temporarily successful and then they disappear and they come back.
I also have a question. I wanted to tell you I'm very grateful for the personal story that you shared at the beginning, because also working on emotions, we started with a lot of them, so it was great. Thank you for sharing that. And I was wondering, so you said you discussed with people who had lost a part of their data. I'm definitely a keeper. I never delete anything. But sometimes when I do happen to lose something because I haven't taken sufficient care of it, like it happened with your phone, it does happen to me also sometimes. I also feel kind of relieved that maybe I lost 7 years of emails that I really didn't need and they are not there anymore. It's not that I deleted them, but it's like there was a fire or something, but a digital one. So I wonder if other people are feeling the same.
Maybe you can answer. I think so. I think many people do, right? Because it's also oppressive. I mean, the idea of total recall is also something that can be very scary. But I also think that, yes, sometimes when you really needed that email, then of course, then at a later point in your life, you regret it again. But yeah, so the idea, I think, I mean, I sometimes am jealous of historians, like you are, like you have these unique sources, and because there are scarce, it gives you so many more opportunities to build your narrative around this one source. Whereas now, and that's also why digital humanities can be helpful as a method. We have to deal with patterns and we have to deal with volume, and which also gives us other angles and opportunities to relate to that, but it is definitely, for both as a scholar and as a person, has its own challenge. Yeah. Maybe we should just drop every now and then our phones in the toilet.
So if I can, a policy question. You had this challenging slide, like should we be all our personal digital archivists? And as a digital humanist of medieval history, and being an object of your study, I could share with you that I don't keep my stuff in iCloud, for instance. I have my own server at home and I have physical backups, and I don't want my stuff on iCloud. I want them on my cloud that I manage my own server. That's the very niche audience. But what I'm interested in is documenting our presence in the virtual space with those scrolls of pages. That, of course, libraries as legal deposit institutions have now strategies what they crawl and how often, depending on various criteria. So I wanted to ask you whether you would feel comfortable sharing what is the policy in your country at the moment for archiving private web pages and social media profiles, and how do you deal with locking this archive for a certain amount of time, as we do in France. And I was just thinking from the policy point of view, how do you archive stuff that is online? And I really don't want my tweets accessible through Internet Archive or my blog when I was 15. Please don't read my blog when I was 15, you know. Thank you if you have some insights.
So in the Netherlands, we have the policy. The law that the Royal Library goes by is from the 19th century. So it means that we cannot crawl the internet in the same way as, for instance, the Internet Archive does. So we have to, per website, ask for permission, or the archive has to ask for permission. And once they have that permission, it's archived, but it's not open access. So it means that you have to go to the library, just as I think here in France, where you can then have a look at the material. It's the same in the UK. I think only Portugal is an exception where they have everything out in the open.
Britain is doing like regular crawls of
it's doing regular
pages,
crawls,
but they are not openly accessible, right?
Yeah.
So there is archiving of the British internet,
Yeah.
but then whether or not your personal page is considered British internet is just a question of where you registered your domain.
Yeah.
So after living in the UK for some years, like I think my web page wouldn't be crawled by their crawlers, right?
Yeah.
So it's also definition of the boundary, because legislation is always country-based, but internet isn't necessarily. Sure, we register domains in countries, but everything is in the cloud, besides my personal pictures.
Yeah, and so what also happens is then that there are these data donation programs that we have, so where people donate that data. So then it's a very intentional way of donating to the archive. I was at one point discussing with my PhD to do an experiment together with the archive, a local archive, to have this kind of individual cloud storage at the archive that will automatically stream your personal data into the archive, so that it would be locked in a safe space. But we never made a second step to it. But I still like to do it just to test what are then the legal, emotional, psychological, economical hurdles that you then have, or what are the benefits also.
I think there are a few web archivists in the room.
Yeah.
So if some of them want to react on how you draw a frontier on the web, a national frontier, it would be interesting, maybe.
Julien, Vladimir.
Yeah, in France in 2006, since 2006, there is a legal framework, French legal framework regarding web archiving, and the scope of legal deposit was extended to all materials broadcasted and released in the web. So there is a special condition regarding the legal framework, but we could archive all web materials who are produced by people who live in France, and we try to manage that perimeter with a work with a lot of registered actors, stakeholders, who gives us the list of all websites registered and recorded in France. So this is, but really in a few words, the way that we can crawl and archive only national websites and materials on the publications on the web.
But we could challenge that because you know the seeds, so the URLs you start with are from French websites, but you never know what happens with the hypertext after that. No.
We use filters to keep Eritrix, our robot, to keep our robot in the perimeter, in the boundaries of what the law defined. But yeah, it's of course we have a lot of pages, web pages who are outside the period, but it's we consider that it's a part of what we have in France, but with all the filters that we put in our robots, in the parameters of the robot, we can stop it and keep it in that frontier. But yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, so the question is, how are you in France where you were 15 and blogging? No? Okay.
Any other question or comments? If not, well, thank you again for your presentation and for the nice discussion afterwards.
Thank you for listening.